My name is Clara. I'm 59 years old, and I've spent the last 30 years of my life running kitchens and perfecting pastries, all while nurturing a team that trusted me. Today, I handed in my resignation letter to my boss, Evan. He didn't even look up, just kept sipping his coffee, eyes glued to the screen of his laptop as his fingers clicked away at something I couldn't even bother to care about. Evan used to be my apprentice, young, eager, and full of ambition. I had trained him, shaped him, and watched him grow into a cook who eventually climbed the ranks. But over the years, something had shifted. It wasn't just Evan anymore, it was Tessa, his new ally. Tessa, the sous chef who had once admired me, now seemed to find every opportunity to undermine my authority, all while whispering about how old-fashioned I was. Tessa, who would mock my slow pace, insinuate that I was past my prime. I wasn't even allowed to walk into the kitchen without her casting a sneer my way. I slipped the letter across the desk, watching Evan's fingers pause mid-click. He finally glanced at it, then back at the screen. No words, nothing. Just a deep, deliberate sip of coffee. I swallowed my frustration, but I knew there was no point. I had been invisible for months, like an ornament on a shelf that everyone simply forgot to dust. My presence had become an inconvenience, a prop that held the kitchen together even when I wasn't respected for it. "Are you sure about this, Clara?" Evan finally asked, his voice not even bothered, more like a passing thought. I didn't want to argue. I didn't have the energy left to explain why I was leaving. Instead, I stood up, gathered my things, and walked out. I didn't look back. I wasn't going to waste another minute trying to prove my worth to people who didn't even see me anymore. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift off my chest. I didn't need to be there anymore. It was time to let it all crumble. But not yet. Not today. And so, I left. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the grocery store ahead of me. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the stillness. My mind was swirling, trying to piece together everything that had just happened. The resignation letter, Evan's indifference, Tessa's smirks. I had spent decades building a legacy at that bakery. Late nights, perfecting recipes. Early mornings, making sure the displays were flawless. I was the one who kept everything running smoothly, who made sure we had the best ingredients, the best techniques. But somehow, in the past few months, I had become a relic. A piece of furniture no one cared to dust off. I remembered when Evan was just a kid, eager to learn, soaking up everything I had to teach him. Now he barely looked me in the eye. Tessa had wormed her way in, whispering behind my back, slowly pushing me to the edges of a kitchen I had once ruled. And all along, I had been covering for their mistakes, their rushed orders. The kitchen delays that, somehow, always seemed to fall on my shoulders. A particular night hit me hard. Tessa had made that snide comment, like always, something about me being too slow for modern kitchens. It stung, and I fought the urge to prove her wrong. But instead of walking out, I stayed. Stayed late, as I often did, redoing every dessert tray by myself. I worked through the exhaustion, redid the trays, and made sure everything was perfect. But was that the real reason they were pushing me out? I suddenly realized it wasn't just about speed. It wasn't even about the food. It was about control. They didn't want me anymore, not because I couldn't do the job, but because I outshone them. I was a reminder of what they could never be, no matter how hard they tried. I hadn't noticed it before, not fully, but I was a threat to them, just by existing. They wanted the spotlight, and I was in the way. Old-fashioned wasn't the word they used. Number, they didn't call me outdated. They called me better, and that's why they were trying to break me down. I glanced at the resignation letter on the passenger seat, the ink still fresh, the edges curling. They didn't deserve me. I put the car in reverse, slowly backing out of the parking lot. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I wasn't going back. The bakery would crumble without me, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I had given them everything I had, and they had shown me, with every little jab, how little it meant. I drove away, not looking back. But something inside me cracked open. The weight of my resignation felt lighter now, as if a part of me had finally broken free. The email came through just as I was finishing a cup of coffee at home, my favorite mug cradled in my hands like it could somehow ground me. The subject line was simple: meeting request, Adrian Lockwood, 3 p.m. Adrian Lockwood, the new owner of the hotel, a young executive who inherited the place from his father and was trying to modernize everything. I had met him a few times, but we hadn't spoken much. The email wasn't a surprise. After all, I had handed in my resignation just that morning. What did surprise me was the tone. There was no sorry to see you go, no thanks for all your years of hard work, just a meeting request, like it was business as usual. I sighed, glancing around the small apartment I had never truly settled into, the empty corners of my life reflecting the emptiness I felt. Evan and Tessa were already moving into their next phase, a system where I was no longer necessary. I didn't need to go to that meeting. I had already made my decision. But curiosity tugged at me. What would they say? Would they try to talk me out of it? Or worse, would they try to discredit me one last time? By 2:45 p.m., I was sitting in the plush, modern conference room of the hotel, a place where I had once walked with authority and pride. Adrian Lockwood was already seated at the head of the table, tapping away at his phone. Evan and Tessa flanked him like loyal soldiers, their faces impassive but their eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Their gazes were cold, too cold. "Clara," Adrian said without looking up, his voice too casual, "please take a seat." I did, placing my bag beside me. There was a brief silence before Adrian finally looked up from his phone, offering a tight smile. "We wanted to meet with you, Clara, to discuss the situation. We've reviewed the financials, and we believe there's been some misunderstanding." A glance at Evan and Tessa, and I knew what was coming. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a carefully orchestrated move to push me out. Evan had already made sure of that, presenting their reports, the ones with inflated costs and complaints I knew were fabricated. Evan slid a folder toward Adrian, who opened it and began flipping through pages of numbers. "You've been an integral part of the kitchen, Clara," he began, voice flat and rehearsed. "But we've been facing increasing costs in the kitchen, costs you're responsible for. We need to streamline things, and we're considering how best to handle your transition." I could feel the weight of the lies in the air. Every word, every figure they presented was meant to push me out. They had turned my legacy into a problem, and now they were asking me to accept the blame. I opened my own folder, my calm demeanor masking the boiling anger beneath. "I've kept the books for years," I said, meeting Adrian's gaze. "I've kept the kitchen running, even when no one cared about how hard I worked. I kept the suppliers happy, I made sure every order was filled, and I made sure the desserts were perfect. What's really happening here, Adrian, is that you've been led to believe that I'm the problem. You're being lied to." Tessa shifted in her seat, the slightest smirk on her lips. Evan didn't even flinch. They had prepared for this, but I was ready. "Those rising costs you're talking about, most of them are from last-minute orders that Evan pushed through because he didn't want to pay attention to the details. Or because Tessa couldn't get her timing right," I continued, my voice steady, but my words sharper than I meant. "I've been covering their mistakes for months, and now you want to blame me for it?" Adrian blinked, looking over the papers again, as if trying to find the truth in them. "We've been told you're outdated, Clara," he said, leaning back in his chair, his tone too casual for my liking. "The cost of ingredients, the demands of the modern kitchen, it's just too much." "No, Adrian," I said, leaning forward, meeting his gaze directly. "What's too much is the way you've allowed your team to undermine me, to push me aside and take credit for work I did. The cost of ingredients is a problem, but it's not my fault you're choosing convenience over quality. It's not my fault your team couldn't even figure out how to keep the suppliers on track." Evan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he didn't speak. Tessa kept her eyes down, pretending to look at the report, but I knew she was listening. Her silence was as damning as any accusation. Adrian looked between us, his gaze flicking from my calm expression to Evan's nervous fidgeting. He was starting to get it. He didn't want to be the bad guy, but I wasn't here to make him feel comfortable. "I'm not asking for a graceful exit," I said, my voice cool now. "I'm giving it to you, but let me be clear. This was never my choice. You've all made it for me. I won't let you tarnish my name or my legacy by making me out to be the scapegoat." Adrian sighed, glancing at Evan and Tessa, his expression hardening. He could feel the tension thick in the air, and I could tell he wasn't expecting this. "I'll offer you a retirement package," he said finally, his voice more like an ultimatum. "References, severance, a graceful exit." I smiled, the bitterness leaking into my voice. "How kind of you," I said. "I'll take it, but don't think for a second I'm leaving without making sure you understand exactly what you've lost. I'm not just some employee. I built this kitchen. I kept it running. And now you've turned it into a corporate game." Evan opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. "Number, I'm done. I'll sign the paperwork, but that's it. I'm done with this place and done with you." And just like that, I knew my decision had been right. I stood up, the weight of years of silent frustration lifting off my shoulders. Adrian was still staring at me, his face blank. "You've made a mistake," I said, turning on my heel. As I walked out of the room, the door clicking shut behind me, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. They'd never see it coming. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Once I'd left the bakery, it felt like a weight had been lifted off me, but there was still this strange, hollow feeling inside. I hadn't expected to feel so much relief and yet so much emptiness at the same time. It was like watching a tree fall in the forest, knowing it had to happen, but hearing it hit the ground was still jarring. I spent most of the next few days at home, trying to settle into the new normal. I thought I might enjoy the silence, but instead, it felt like the calm before the storm. I hadn't yet said goodbye to all the people who mattered outside of the kitchen: my suppliers, the local farmers I worked with, the dairies, the chocolate makers. They were the ones who truly understood what went into every pastry I crafted, who valued me as much for my commitment to quality as for my leadership. The first visit was to Linnea at the local dairy farm. I had worked with her for nearly a decade, sourcing fresh cream and butter for the cakes that were the crown jewels of my dessert menu. I parked in the gravel lot outside her small farmhouse, the familiar scent of hay and fresh grass filling the air. It was a simple place, but there was beauty in its rustic charm. Linnea was out back tending to the cows. When she saw me approaching, she wiped her hands on her apron and gave me a warm, welcoming smile. "Clara, what brings you out here today?" she asked, her voice light, though there was an undercurrent of curiosity. I hesitated, then handed her an envelope with a handwritten note. "I wanted to say goodbye," I said simply. "I've resigned from the bakery. It's time for me to step away." Her brow furrowed, her smile faltering for a moment. "Oh, honey, I thought you were happy there. What happened?" I shrugged, feeling the old frustration welling up again. "The kitchen's changed. It's not the place I built anymore. They don't need me there, so I'm walking away." Linnea looked at me for a long moment, and then she pulled me into a hug. "I'm so sorry to hear that," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "You've been the heart of that kitchen, Clara. We always looked forward to seeing you at the market, hearing about the new things you were working on." I pulled back, my throat tight. "It's not about them, it's about me. I can't keep pouring myself into something that doesn't value me anymore." She nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "You've done a lot for that place, but you've done a lot for us too. We'll miss you, Clara. But I know you'll make sure we're taken care of. You've always been so good to us." I smiled, but it was bittersweet. "I'll keep in touch," I promised. "And if you ever need anything, anything at all, you can count on me." She smiled back, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I know that. Take care of yourself, Clara. We'll be all right, as long as we have good people like you in our corner." After leaving the farm, I drove to a few more suppliers, small local businesses that I'd worked with over the years. Some were surprised to hear that I was leaving the hotel bakery, but most understood. They all expressed their gratitude for how I had always made sure to take care of them, and I made sure to pass on my contacts to the team that would take over for me. One of the hardest stops was at the small artisanal chocolate shop, where I had gotten my favorite dark chocolate for my signature truffles. Eva, the owner, was behind the counter when I entered. Her face lit up when she saw me, but then quickly dimmed when she saw the sadness in my expression. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she asked, almost as a statement. I nodded. "I am. It's time," she sighed, walking over to me with a small box of chocolates in her hands. "I've always loved working with you, Clara. You've been a true champion for quality. I know you've been the reason so many of our products made it into the bakery showcase." I looked down at the box of chocolates, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "I didn't do it for the recognition. I did it because I believe in what you're doing. Your chocolate is the best, and it deserves to be front and center. I just wish it could have been enough." She set the box down and pulled me into a tight hug. "You did more than enough, Clara. You brought joy to so many people's lives with the work you did. It's their loss, not yours." I pulled away, blinking back tears. "Thank you, Eva. I'll never forget your support. I'll pass your contact along, but you know where to find me if you ever need anything." As I left the shop, the weight of everything that had led me to this point finally started to settle in. I had spent so much of my life being everything to everyone else, but I wasn't going to let that define me anymore. I was walking away with my integrity intact. No more pretending I was fine when I wasn't. No more putting my heart into a place that no longer saw me. It was time to build something new, and I would do it on my terms. A week after I left the bakery, I was sipping coffee on my small apartment porch, enjoying the quiet morning. The street was calm, just a few early joggers and dog walkers passing by. For the first time in a long while, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Then my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number, but the area code was local. I hesitated, but curiosity won out, and I answered. Clara, it's Adrian Lockwood. We've got a problem. I sat up straight, the peaceful morning suddenly feeling tense. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There's been some issues with the suppliers. They're refusing to work with us, and now we can't fulfill several event orders. Adrian's voice was strained, almost frantic. I need to know, what happened? Why is everyone pulling out? I leaned back in my chair, trying to digest his words. Of course, they hadn't anticipated this. They had underestimated the intricate web I'd woven with the suppliers over the years. I hadn't just been a head pastry chef, I'd been the bridge that kept everything from falling apart. Adrian, I told you, I built those relationships. I've been working with those vendors for years. It wasn't just about making desserts, it was about trust. You can't replace that overnight. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Adrian taking a deep breath. I didn't realize how much you were handling. We tried to manage it, but Evan and Tessa, they've been dealing with the numbers and it's been a mess. They kept telling me everything was fine. I felt a sharp pang of disbelief, but I didn't let it show. Evan and Tessa, huh? They've been telling you everything's fine while they've been pushing me out and sabotaging the whole operation. Adrian didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his tone was quieter, more measured. I had no idea. I should have listened to you. Clara, I'm sorry. I'm in over my head here. Can you help us? The silence stretched between us. I wasn't sure what to feel. A part of me wanted to walk away, to leave them to drown in their own mess. But another part of me, the part that had always cared, knew this was my last chance to make sure they understood what I brought to the table. What do you want me to do? I asked, my voice calm, but the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I need you to come back, even just for a day or two, he said quickly. I know you've left, but I need you to help us salvage this. If we don't get these orders out, we'll lose the clients, and we'll lose the reputation. I'm not coming back. I cut him off, my decision clear. I'm done, but I will come in to see the mess you've made. I'll come in just to watch the fireworks. There was a pause on his end, and I could practically hear him reconsidering, trying to find a way to twist my arm. Clara. No, Adrian, you wanted me gone. Now you're dealing with the consequences. But don't worry, I'll be there, just to watch. I ended the call before he could respond, the finality of my words hanging in the air. It didn't take long for me to get to the hotel. I parked in the lot, standing by my car for a moment, looking at the building that had once been my second home. The hum of the city felt distant now, like I was a ghost walking among the living. I hadn't expected to feel so detached, so separate from the place that had once been a crucial part of my identity. I walked through the front doors, past the concierge who gave me a look of curiosity but said nothing. The kitchen was where I belonged, where I had shaped my career, and where I had poured my soul into everything I created. Now, it was nothing more than a shell. As I entered, the chaos was evident. The kitchen was a mess. Half-finished cakes, trays of desserts with missing components, and a team of staff who looked like they hadn't slept in days. The tension in the air was palpable. I walked to the back of the room, where Evan and Tessa were huddled over an order list. When they saw me, their faces froze. Evan's eyes darted to Tessa before he straightened up, trying to regain some semblance of authority. Clara, what are you doing here? Evan asked, his voice flat, but the tension was still clear in his posture. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. Just wanted to see how things were going. It seems like everything's falling apart, though, Tessa snorted. This is all your fault, you know, she said with a sneer. You're the one who made everything so complicated. You're the one who— Enough, Tessa, Evan snapped, cutting her off. He turned to me, his voice quieter now. Clara, you don't have to be here. Just go. Let us handle it. I tilted my head, a small, sad smile tugging at my lips. Handle it? You can't even keep up with the orders. You've had months to get it together, and now look at you. Evan's jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or maybe just fear. He didn't respond, and the silence stretched between us. Tessa, on the other hand, was having none of it. You think you're better than us, don't you? You think you're the only one who can do this job. Well, guess what? We're doing just fine without you. I shook my head, finally feeling that release. No, you're not, but go ahead. Keep pretending. I'm not here to fix your mess. I'm here to watch. The door swung open, and Adrian stepped inside, his face flushed with stress. He didn't even look at me as he went straight to Evan and Tessa. We've lost half of our suppliers, Adrian said, his voice strained. They're pulling out. We can't fulfill the orders. We're about to lose everything. I smiled softly to myself. This was it. This was the moment they'd realize how much I had been holding everything together. I watched them scramble, but I didn't feel pity. Not anymore. Adrian glanced over at me, clearly expecting some kind of miracle, but I simply shook my head. Good luck, I said. And with that, I turned and walked out. It wasn't my problem anymore. I had already given them all they needed. What they didn't realize was that their failures had been inevitable once they decided they didn't need me anymore. Now, they would see the cost of their arrogance. I had barely made it to my car when the phone rang again. It was Adrian, but this time, his voice was frantic. Clara, you have to come back. They're refusing to take our calls. We're losing everything. The event planners are threatening to cancel, and I don't know what to do. Please. I let the phone ring in my hand, staring out the windshield of the car. I could hear the panic in Adrian's voice, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The bakery had already collapsed without me, and there was no sense in me throwing myself back into the fire just to put out their mess. They had created this chaos themselves, and they were going to have to face it. I ended the call without saying another word and drove home. It wasn't until a few hours later, as the sun was beginning to set, that I found myself back at the hotel. I wasn't sure why I came back. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe I wanted to see just how badly things had gone south. The hotel was in full-blown crisis mode by the time I walked into the kitchen. The energy was palpable. Staff were running around, scrambling to make up for the missing ingredients. Orders were being tossed aside, and a few chefs were shouting to one another over the noise. It looked like a war zone. And then there was Evan and Tessa, standing in the center of it all, their faces drawn with exhaustion and frustration. They were the ones who had pushed me out. They had been the ones who had insisted the kitchen didn't need me anymore, that they could handle it. The irony of it all made me sick. I watched for a moment from the door, leaning against the frame, just taking it all in. There was no grace in their movements, no order. No one knew what they were doing, and Evan was barking orders with a kind of desperation I had never heard from him before. Tessa, on the other hand, had her arms crossed, looking like she'd already given up. I felt a twinge of satisfaction deep inside. This was it. This was what happened when you underestimated someone like me. Finally, Evan saw me standing there, and his eyes widened in surprise. Clara, he said, his voice strained, what are you doing here? You need to leave. I'm here to watch, I cut him off, pushing myself off the doorframe and stepping inside. I told you I wasn't coming back, but I didn't say I wouldn't watch you crash and burn. He looked at me like he wanted to argue, but something in his eyes, desperation maybe, made him hesitate. He turned to Tessa, and she was already scowling at me. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? She snapped, her voice full of venom. Watching us struggle after everything you did? I met her gaze without blinking. You really thought you could replace me, didn't you? You really thought it was just about desserts and fancy plating. You never understood what made this kitchen work, Tessa. You thought you could handle it without me. Well, here you are. I stepped around them, my eyes scanning the chaos. The kitchen was falling apart before my eyes, and as much as I hated to admit it, I felt a strange sense of finality. Clara, Adrian appeared at my side, his face pale. Please, you have to help us. We can't. No, I said firmly, cutting him off before he could finish his sentence. This is your mess now. You don't get to drag me back into it just because you're drowning. He opened his mouth to protest, but I didn't let him speak. Adrian, don't. Don't ask me for help now, not after everything that's happened. You pushed me out, you made me feel like I wasn't needed, and now you want me to come back and save you? I shook my head, feeling a bitter laugh rise in my throat. You've got everything you need to fix this. You just need to face the consequences. The kitchen staff was still moving in a frenzied panic, scrambling to fix problems that were far beyond their control. I could hear the orders being shouted, the disorganization growing worse with every passing minute. Tessa shot me a furious glare but said nothing. She didn't have to. She knew exactly what had gone wrong. Adrian just stood there, looking helpless. He finally glanced around the kitchen, realizing for the first time what I had been holding together all those years. He was the one who had gotten so caught up in the numbers, the spreadsheets, the bottom line. But he hadn't understood the people, the connections, the heart of the operation. You want to know the truth, Adrian? I said, my voice low but sharp. You never respected me. And now you see what happens when you don't respect the people who keep the wheels turning. You let Evan and Tessa take control, and now look at you. The words hung in the air, heavy and biting. The kitchen was no longer the place of pride and creativity it once was. It was a battlefield. I turned and headed for the door, knowing that nothing I did now would fix the mess they had made. They would learn the hard way. And if they didn't, well, that wasn't my problem anymore. Good luck, I said over my shoulder, and then I walked out. The door clicked behind me with finality. I had made my choice. It had been a couple of days since I walked out of that kitchen, leaving the chaos behind. I had my quiet moments, my calm, but they didn't last long. I had known what would happen. I had known that Adrian would try to make things right, but I wasn't prepared for how fast everything would spiral out of control. I had barely settled into my favorite chair when the phone rang again. This time, the number on the screen was familiar. Adrian. I braced myself before answering. Clara, it's Adrian. We need to talk. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I wasn't sure if I had the energy to do this again, but I knew I didn't have much of a choice. I had left them behind, but they hadn't let me go yet. What's going on now? I asked, keeping my voice steady. I wasn't going to let him drag me back into the mess, no matter how badly they needed help. There's been an internal review, Adrian said quickly, his voice sounding like he was treading water. After the suppliers started pulling out and we couldn't fulfill orders, I had to take a closer look. I found something I wasn't expecting. I raised an eyebrow, a bad feeling settling in my stomach. What do you mean? It's the reports? Evan and Tessa. Adrian's voice broke slightly. They've been falsifying numbers, Clara. They've been inflating costs, misrepresenting the orders, and, well, we've uncovered a lot of manipulation in the records. I didn't know. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I told you, I said, my voice quieter than before. I told you what was happening. You didn't want to believe me. You pushed me out, and now you're seeing the mess they've created. Adrian was silent for a moment before he spoke again, this time with more urgency. Clara, I need your help. I've started an audit, but I don't know where to go from here. The records they've tampered with? He trailed off, clearly overwhelmed. I need someone who understands the kitchen's inner workings, someone who can help me sort through this. I need you to look at the evidence and— Adrian, I interrupted, shaking my head even though he couldn't see it. You should have listened to me when I told you what was happening. You don't need my help now. You've got this. You've got the truth in front of you. You just have to deal with it. I know, Adrian said softly, sounding defeated. But you were right about everything. Evan and Tessa, they've been playing a game, and now we're stuck in the middle of it. I don't know what to do next. I thought everything was under control, but it wasn't. I'm sorry, Clara. I should have trusted you. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but it didn't change anything. It didn't change the fact that I had been right all along. Listen, Adrian, I said, the words coming out in a calm but firm tone. You have to fix this yourself. I'm not going to clean up their mess. I'm done. You want to make this right? Then get rid of them. Clean up the records. And maybe, just maybe, you'll start seeing the value of the people you've lost. I wasn't expecting an answer, and I didn't get one right away. But after a long pause, Adrian spoke again, his voice a little stronger. You're right. This is on me, and I will fix it. But Clara, thank you for everything. You were the heart of that place. I felt a twinge of something at his words, but it wasn't pride or relief. It was simply closure. I had already made my peace with leaving. Good luck, Adrian, I said, my voice colder than I intended. You're going to need it. I hung up before he could respond, feeling that same weight lift off my shoulders. They were on their own now. The truth was out, and the bakery's reputation would never be the same. But it wasn't my problem anymore. The next day, I woke up to an email from Adrian with the subject line, Audit Results and Termination Notices. I knew what it meant even before I clicked on it. The report was long, filled with all the numbers and details I had expected to see. But there was one section that made me pause, the final paragraph. Based on the findings, the following employees will be terminated immediately due to ethics violations and falsified reports: Evan Marshall and Tessa Hawkins. I couldn't help but feel a small, fleeting sense of satisfaction. It was over for them. They had played their game, and now they had lost. And as I read through the email, seeing their names dragged through the mud in black and white, I realized something. I wasn't here to fix their mistakes anymore. I wasn't here to be their scapegoat. I had walked away with my integrity intact, and that was more than they would ever have. The email ended with a note from Adrian, apologizing once more for what had happened and stating that the bakery would be under new management moving forward. I closed my laptop, feeling the final weight of the situation settle on me. It wasn't victory, it wasn't revenge, it was simply the end of a chapter. And with that, I knew it was time to move on. The bakery was theirs to rebuild, but I was done. It had been a week since the audit report came out, and the dust was beginning to settle. The hotel bakery was now in full damage control mode, and I had no intention of going back to help clean it up. The hardest part wasn't walking away from the chaos. It was the realization that I had given everything to a place that had never truly valued me. But now, as the fallout unfolded, I felt more at peace than I had in years. Adrian had reached out a few times since the termination of Evan and Tessa, trying to convince me to return to help with the rebuilding process. He offered me a hefty salary increase, full creative control over the bakery, and the chance to handpick my new team. But it didn't matter. I wasn't interested in fixing what was broken. The bakery had become a symbol of everything I had worked so hard to build, only for it to fall apart under the weight of ego and greed. I walked to my small kitchen, my coffee brewing in the background, and pulled out my phone. I had an email from Paula, a former colleague who had always believed in me. She ran a small but growing dessert consulting firm, helping independent cafes and restaurants create custom dessert menus. It was something I had considered before, but never had the time for. But now, with the luxury of space and a fresh perspective, I could see it clearly. It was the kind of work that allowed me to get back to my roots, creating pastries that mattered without the corporate pressures. No more management headaches, no more office politics, just dessert. I quickly typed a response, setting up a meeting to discuss joining her team. It felt like the first step toward a future that wasn't tied to the hotel or its toxic atmosphere. An hour later, I was sitting in a small, cozy cafe with Paula, sipping coffee and discussing the potential of joining her firm. She was warm and enthusiastic, a stark contrast to the coldness of my previous work environment. "You're exactly what we need," Paula said, her eyes shining with excitement. "You've got the experience, the connections, and the skill to help us grow. It's just the right pace, Clara. No more of that rush mentality. Just making beautiful food for people who appreciate it." I could feel the weight of my years in the bakery slipping off my shoulders as we spoke. It was clear to me now, this was the path forward. I didn't need to be stuck in a world that had no place for me anymore. "I'm in," I said, the words coming easily. "Let's do it." That was the moment I realized just how much I had been holding myself back, tethered to a place that no longer served me. And here, in this quiet cafe, with Paula's encouragement, I was free to build something meaningful again, on my own terms. The next few days passed in a blur of excitement and anticipation. I started working with Paula's team, collaborating with independent business owners who cared about quality, who valued creativity over profit margins. I had time to focus on what I loved, designing new desserts, working closely with chefs to ensure every ingredient was top-notch, and helping small businesses thrive with custom dessert menus that told a story. For the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing again. By the end of the week, I was back in the kitchen, but this time it was my own space. I wasn't just fixing mistakes or filling gaps, I was building something new, something that felt right. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was working for someone else's approval. I was doing this for me. Later that evening, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset in the distance. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Adrian. "I understand your decision, Clara. We're going to move forward with new management, and I've been in touch with a few of your former suppliers. They're all on board for the future of the bakery, but I wanted to reach out one last time to let you know that you were right. I didn't see it before, but you were the heart of that kitchen. Thank you for everything." I read the message twice, letting the words settle in. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a plea to come back, but it was an acknowledgement of what I had built, what I had given, and what they had failed to see. I set the phone down, took a long sip of wine, and smiled to myself. It was time to move forward. I had made the right choice. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The first few months of my new life felt like a blur of possibilities. I was back in the kitchen, not just designing dessert menus, but helping independent cafes and family-owned restaurants create something beautiful and personal. I had rediscovered the joy in my work, the creativity, and the satisfaction that came from knowing every dessert was crafted with care, not rushed for some corporate timeline. Paula's firm had grown quickly, and it was clear we were on the right path. The work was fulfilling, and every client we took on was another step toward building something that had meaning, something that wasn't tainted by the politics or the pressure of a big hotel. The transition was easier than I expected. I found myself working fewer hours, yet feeling more satisfied at the end of each day. I was able to take long walks in the afternoon with my dog, which had always been something I wished I had time for in the past. There were afternoons where I sat on my porch, sketching new dessert ideas or reading a book, my mind free from the chaos that had consumed it for so many years. I started thinking about the future more, about what I could build for myself. Maybe I would even start my own pastry consultancy one day. The idea had been lingering in the back of my mind ever since I left the hotel, but now it felt like it was within reach. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Word had spread about Evan and Tessa's fall from grace, and with that, the whispers began. I'd heard through Paula that Evan was struggling to find work, his reputation damaged by the audit, and Tessa had tried reaching out for recommendations to other kitchens, but no one seemed to be interested. I wasn't sure how much of their downfall was public knowledge, but I knew they were being forced to face the consequences of their actions. Even though I had left them behind, there was a part of me that still couldn't help but feel a small, quiet satisfaction at how everything had unfolded. They had dismissed me, underestimated me, and now everything they had worked for was crumbling. But I didn't need to gloat. I was done with that world. My focus had shifted to something better. One afternoon, as I was preparing for a new client meeting, I got a message from an old friend, Laura, who had worked in the hotel's front of house. She was someone who had always understood me, who had seen the stress and tension I'd been under when I was with the hotel. Her message made me smile. "Clara, I just wanted to check in. I heard the news about the hotel, and I have to say, I'm so proud of you for walking away. I'm sure you're doing great things now, and if you ever need help with any marketing, you know where to find me." I felt a warm sense of gratitude wash over me as I read her words. She was one of the few people who truly understood the weight I'd carried, and now she was offering her support without hesitation. It felt good to know that there were people who still believed in me, even when I had nothing to prove anymore. Later that week, I met with a small cafe owner who wanted help creating a dessert menu that aligned with their farm-to-table philosophy. I listened carefully as they spoke about their vision, their values, and what they wanted their customers to experience. I felt a rush of excitement, knowing that I could take this raw idea and shape it into something beautiful. As we sat down to discuss details, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come in such a short amount of time. Just months ago, I had been stuck in a world that had drained me, surrounded by people who saw me as disposable. Now, I was surrounded by people who respected my craft, my experience, and my ability to bring something special to the table. By the time I left that meeting, I had a new project to work on, and my mind was already buzzing with ideas. That evening, I sat down to dinner with Paula at one of our favorite local spots. We laughed over wine, talking about our future plans, and I realized how much I had missed the freedom of being able to focus on what mattered most to me: my work, my passion, and my life outside the kitchen. As I walked home, I thought about everything that had led me here: the struggle, the heartbreak, the quiet rebellion against a system that didn't appreciate me. But now, with every step forward, I was building something that was entirely mine. It was the life I had always wanted but never believed I could have. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the expectations that had once defined me, free from the toxic environment that had stifled my creativity, and free to build a future that was mine to create. I wasn't looking back anymore. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't letting anyone else define my worth. I had found my peace, and it felt like the beginning of something new.